Well, hi everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. For ExecuNet, I am Tony Vlahos, and I'm excited to be here with Mark A. Pfister. He is ExecuNet's in-house board expert and a go-to strategist for both Fortune 500s and private companies. And today, as you know, we're going to have a real open conversation about what matters most in today's board selection process and what's shifting behind the scenes. Mark's going to share some profound truths and he's going to bust some myths as well. So whether you're just getting started or looking to level up, this is your chance to ask questions and get some really great trusted insight from someone who's been in the room where all this stuff happens. So as promised, let me tell you just a little bit more about Mark. Mark A. Pfister, of course, is the CEO and Chief Board Consultant of MA Pfister Strategy Group. That's an executive management and board consulting firm that serves as a strategic advisory council for executives and boards in the public, private, nonprofit, and PE sectors. He's the founder and CEO of the IBDC.D. I'll tell you what that is. It is the International Board Director Competency Designation, and it's an education certification program, which we'll be talking a little bit more about in a little while. And he's a board director and board consultant. He's worked with hundreds of public, private, nonprofit, PE organizations. He also speaks at over 50 events yearly. I don't know how you get all this in, by the way. He's written a great book titled Across the Board: The Modern Architecture Behind an Effective Board of Directors. It reached Amazon's #1 new release in corporate governance. Mark, I covered a lot. Have I left anything out, really?
I think that's good. I appreciate it, Tony. Thank you very much. Thank you very
My
much.
pleasure, and it's a joy always to spend time with you.
I enjoy these as well, and ExecuNet's been a great partner with us as well. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
I'm very happy to hear that. So let me start with one that I know is probably on a lot of people's minds. I mean, we hear about board seats and we wonder, hey, I may not be at the C-suite level. I certainly am not the sitting CEO. Do I need to be one in order to land a board seat?
Yeah, it's a pretty common question, and my answer directly in that is no. You don't need to be C-suite to be an effective director. Now, do we still have some of these ideas with boards where the board itself may be from a mindset of saying we only want to take C-suites or previous C-suite directors? Yes, those exist out there. But I can tell you that modern day boards and what we call modern day board architecture actually frowns upon that. It frowns upon a board being made up of entirely prior CEOs. And even today, it frowns upon everybody being a prior C-level. So there are expertise areas that are being searched for that may never be at the C-level, but are absolutely needed on boards. A few examples of that could be in the tech area, the cyber area. AI, of course, is huge right now. Human capital and risk are the big ones for me that come to mind. But absolutely not. And part of the mindset of this, Tony, to really further this question along for those in your audience today, is to say that even if you're on the track yourself to become C-level or you already are C-level, there is a prep that should be happening also for the discipline of board directorship. And I can tell you, just because somebody was previously at a C-level or CEO does not necessarily make them a great board director. In fact, some of the greatest board directors I've ever worked with had very short stints or short times in the C-level, and to me are some of the top directors I've ever worked with, both as a fellow director or as an advisor or consultant to those boards. So absolutely not. We want to dispel that myth and that rumor out there right now. One last thing to mention about that, and I write about this in my book, in the studies that we've done over many years, and looking at boards that truly operate at the top levels of I'll say everything from nonprofit, private, public, PE, government for that matter, family office boards, we notice that and we condone the fact that no more than 25% of the makeup or the as we call the architecture of a board should be from the same industry in which that company serves. Now we could overlay the CEO topic in this or the C-level topic into this as well. But there is a value in having that diversity of perspective, which leads to diversity of thought. We can do that by title or study that by title. We can study that and look at that by industry as well. So
Mhm.
we're looking for more of that diversity and that mindset. I'll call it more mindset diversity on boards right now to make sure we're getting this very diverse viewpoint.
Yeah, that's really great to know. And I didn't understand all that. So thank you. Thinking about certifications. Now, a big focus of yours clearly is certification and training. Would we say it's mandatory, a nice to have? What's the truth about that one, Mark?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. It comes up quite often. And it's funny, I'll tell you that many people without certifications are the first ones to say, no, you don't need a certification. I've been on boards for many years. And that is true. And maybe I start out with the facts of this first or the stats on this. So, as of 2025, this year, no major country mandates universal education or certification for board directors. That's just the way it is currently. However, some countries and specific sectors do impose mandatory training, qualification frameworks, competency-based requirements. You see these in regulated industries such as financial services or state-owned enterprises. Publicly listed companies also in some of these jurisdictions have this. And that ranges depending on region throughout the world or by country. But we need to look at the bigger picture here of what's mandated versus are you truly building your knowledge base and are you conveying the fact that you are an everlasting learner or a continuous learner in your field. Make no mistake that board directorship is indeed its own vertical. It's a discipline. So again, just because you have previous senior level experience does not make you a great director, and nor does it get you through the types of interviews that we put board candidates through. um, so so keep that in mind that there's not a requirement for it. However, this is what we look for. And I'm going to give a few examples of current day in the last month or two in some of the nominating committees I'm working with. First and foremost, one of the big things to show in any senior leadership position, including board directorship, is that you are a lifelong learner. You want to show that you are looking to further your knowledge, understand trending, know what's happening in industry areas, and further your effectiveness, in this case, as a great board director. That only happens through ongoing education and experience. Both of those together are great ways to do that.
Mhm.
So we look at this as a balance of really three areas. We call it your career trifecta. Expertise is what you know, experience is how you've applied it, and the proof is we call it proof. Who or what is the outside body that also says, yes, we agree Tony is a great director. Anybody can toot their horn all day long, but sometimes it's great to have that third party, that third body now that's also saying that we agree and it supports your expertise and your experience. Now,
Mhm.
let me bring this one step further in this question because, again, many people will say the education and certification part is great, but you never get appointed based on that alone. Here's what I'll say to that. Yes, that is probably true. However, in three of the last five nominating committee processes I've worked with, where at least one, maybe two directors were being searched for, vetted, appointed, we got down to our final two or three candidates. I can tell you they were very equal in their experience, in their backgrounds, and what we were looking for. What do you think the next thing is that we looked for? We looked for the learning mentality, the learning mindset. And we did that by understanding, are they continuous learners? Are they going out there and searching for areas where they can continue their education? And by the way, if we want to add to this the proof aspect I mentioned a moment ago, is there some sort of regulatory body that's also saying that for this education and certification, um, do you have to stay active with that? CPE credits, those types of things. Those were the deciding factors for three of the last five appointments in the last 2 to 3 months. And that should tell you something that it may not be the main factor in the appointment. However, it is being looked at, and we do weigh that, especially if we are down to our final candidates. We look at every aspect of who they are, what they do, where they spend their time. Are they furthering themselves? Can the board benefit from that furtherance as well?
Mhm. You touched on this in your thorough answer just now, Mark, but I would love it if we riffed a little bit more on the types of skills, the skill sets, in other words, that boards are actively hunting for right now. What do
Sure.
those do?
Sure. And you know what I'll do? I'll share a page that I showed in our previous webinar together a month or so ago to help support that.
Okay.
It'll bring up some good talking points. Boards are, of course, looking for, as I mentioned, the expertise and the experience. They want those areas. It does not necessarily have to always be in senior leadership areas. It does not, as I mentioned, have to be at the C level. That's not the major trending we're seeing right now. We're seeing expertise areas and verticals that's being searched for. But if we add into this also the modern day smorgasbord, I'll say, of all the areas we're looking for. We're not looking for the one trick ponies anymore. We're looking for people that bring this depth of knowledge and the executive presence and all of these great words that we could throw out there as buzzwords. But let me tell you how we're doing that. So, number one, I started to mention this a moment ago. We are looking at designing boards in the modern makeup with mixed industry background. That's the one that's the circle that's at the top of the screen right now. We have realized over the years that boards that are made up of all expertise from the same industry creates these islands of knowledge. And there's no understanding or little understanding of what's happening in other industries. I will tell you, for me personally, one of the biggest industries to break out of this approach has been the life sciences, or specifically the pharmaceutical area. Everybody for many years on these boards, every appointed director had some sort of in-depth background in the pharmaceutical area or life sciences area. Well, when these boards started to break away and started to appoint directors that were from other industry areas and other industry verticals, they started to really get into much deeper conversation and decision making in the boardroom. And for me, it's quite, I'm always happy to see that because that's what boards should be doing. It's not just about working inside of a vacuum. You want to know what's happening across all areas of industry, even though you may be focused in a very specific vertical. So boards are realizing that the expertise and experience of other industries can be invaluable to them in their decision making. The other piece that we are looking at quite closely right now, and I'll explain why this is in just a moment, but you see here it says leadership, but also plus deep operations experience. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have an operations background title in what you did, but here's why we're digging into this right now. Some of the best strategies ever created or proposed by a board or an individual board director are not right sized for the organization that they're proposing it for. The only way to make a strategy right sized for the organization is to understand the operations component and what that organization is capable of implementing or capable of accomplishing. So, what we're looking for is this alignment between the proposed strategy and the operations expertise to make sure that it's implementable within that environment. This is hugely important right now. We see this as an issue in many cases where um, if a public company director or CEO retires from their main career, and let's say they join a private company board of a much smaller company, many times they're not successful because they're not able to right size. They don't have the same resources to delegate to that they would have had in the 100,000 person public company. Now the board may have to be a little more hands-on or right size, as I say, their strategy for that particular organization. We're big, of course, in these historically underrepresented directors. This is where we talk about the diversity and in the inclusion areas. This to me, most directors have always been focused on this. In more recent years, this is focused on many other components, geography, background, upbringing, all these different backgrounds, opportunity areas as well. But this area shouldn't be a surprise really to anybody. The deep strategy and governance knowledge, Tony, to your question, is another area we look at. Just because somebody says they sat in a few strategic planning sessions does not make them an expert in governance, and definitely does not make them an expert in strategy. I'll share one of my go-to questions. I think, Tony, we've had a few discussions on this offline, but in my director interviewing, I'm becoming more known for interviews only lasting 10 minutes because I feel like I know now after interviewing thousands of directors over the last 15 or 20 years, if they cannot answer the following question quickly without any type of hesitation, I know they're going to struggle with making that correlation between the strategy and governance. And my question is very simple. I'm open to share it because I don't think you can fake the answer to it. Here's the question. Tell me about your understanding of the interrelationship between strategy and governance. A senior leader should be able to very quickly answer that particular question. And I'm not looking for goals. I'm not looking for the tasks and the tactical areas. I'm looking for an understanding of what are you actually doing in the boardroom as it relates to strategy in the overall umbrella of governance. We can get into that in a little more detail if we have time, Tony. But I think for those in your audience today, we covered that in depth in the webinar a month or so ago, where this slide is being shown from, so your audience can dig into that if they want to.
Yes, thank you. And what I'm
Yeah.
hearing, just to underscore it, is
Hmm.
you're talking to someone who's an IT executive, and I'm kind of riffing off some of the chats that I've been getting. I'm an IT exec, I'm a sales and marketing person, I'm a fill in the blank. What you're saying is at that moment, no one is off the table or off the board, because if they can answer that question effectively, there's definitely opportunity depending on the type of opportunity is what I'm picking up.
Absolutely. And I will leave the process open to anyone really who can answer that question, because if they understand that interrelationship, I know that they're going to ask the right questions in the boardroom. They're not going to ask tactical questions. They're not going to, once goals are set, yes, they're going to verify that the goals are still accurate and pertinent for the organization. But the remainder of that time in the boardroom, questions should be very much focused on the strategy areas, the how. How are we going to reach our goals? That's the strategy components. And they need to be at the governance level, not the tactical level
Right.
of the delivery of that. Yes, we of course measure the delivery and the speed of delivery by the accomplishment of the tasks, but that to me should be something that's prepped for and understood even before you get to a board meeting. That's part of the board book you should receive on if you're on task and on plan to reach those delivery areas within the strategy that keep you on track for your goals. So to
Mhm.
me, those that level of discussion should really never happen in the boardroom unless there's something unbelievably important as it relates to either milestones or tasks that need to be discussed. And
So
the
Mark
last,
is,
yeah, go ahead.
yes,
Sorry.
no, please continue.
I was going to say that the last area right now, and this is a big trend change over the last, I would say, 8 or so years, 8+ years, is that in the past, most directors were being looked at for their, we call it horizontal knowledge, their knowledge, the broad brushstroke across many areas of leadership, maybe many areas of industry. Um, we do want those types of folks on the board, of course. They're typically the ones that ask very pointed questions as it relates to the overall aspect of something that's being proposed. But today, the other piece that needs to be looked at and understood, and this is great for many in the audience likely that are with us today, Tony, is that the specialized vertical knowledge areas for directors, these directors are being appointed today. Again, you don't want to come in as the one-trick pony that only has tech or only has cyber or only has AI, but that can be a great way to get it in the door to then show your other areas of how you've packaged yourself to bring additional value to these boards. That's a big change. It's sort of this paradigm shift in understanding how to position and package yourself for these opportunities, but know that expertise in a specific area that's in need can be the main catalyst to getting a board appointment. Absolutely.
We work with so many people daily at ExecuNet who, again, high comp, senior level people who have one thing in common, which is we're on the move. We're thinking about what we can do, what we should do next. Sometimes we're unclear, sometimes it's crystal clear, but we don't know quite how to get there.
Hmm.
Regardless, now and then, Mark, the question arises, listen, board seats, is that something I can do keeping my full-time job? Or um, side question is, how much time does it actually consume for me to do
Yeah.
this, whether I'm doing it full-time or in between or as a side gig?
Yeah, yeah. I smile because it brings up something that I correct people on quite often. And first, as it relates to your question of time, many people say, when I get to the point of retirement, I'm going to go search and land some board roles. Let me first say that the word retirement should never enter a conversation ever again if you plan on going down the road of board directorship, because retirement in some cases can lead people to think that you're not in the game anymore. And there is something to be said about someone who is actively in a role um, in a leadership role that is also allowing the time to serve on a board. So as we say in people's packaging and how they position themselves and in interviews and how they get to their interviews, we say lose the terminology of retirement because we don't want we don't want anybody to think that we're not in the game anymore. As it relates to time, this is a big question. And I can tell you when my book came out, it's some of the biggest pushback I got, but I will never sway from this answer or stray from this answer whatsoever. I think there's a slide here as well. I'll pull up. Here it is. So, we say this: any board that you join, I personally don't care if it's a nonprofit, private, public company, PE, venture capital, government type board role, family office, I don't care what the role is. You should have in the back of your mind that you're going to dedicate 250 hours per year per board role that you're serving in. Now, I can hear people already, if you're in the PE space, you're going to say, well, that's very high. You know, we typically say 110 hours. I'm just going to tell you this. I have never seen a truly successful board director that's working in the proper architecture of a board put in less than 250 hours a year. So let me give you the breakdown of what those particular areas are. So typically for universal base duties, we're looking at about 200 hours a year. Don't forget that that includes the research that you should be expected and expecting of yourself to do of competitors, of industry, of trending, areas that are happening both internal and external to your industry that affect you. These are all goal and strategy related type things that this homework needs to be done. This, of course, includes the time of the actual board meetings. But to me, the actual board meetings are a time to discuss the homework that's been done offline in the committee areas. Now, the other piece to mention here, Tony, to this question is that I am not a big fan of directors sitting on boards where they're not assigned to at least one committee. And that's where the additional 50 hours comes in here, where we say the committee duties of plus 50 hours. So we typically call these directors at large. I'm not a big fan of them because it makes it too easy for a director to come into a board meeting and lob questions to other committee areas without having any responsibility for their delivery areas. Remember that the committees are the workhorses of the board. Most of that work should be done, and a majority of it should be done offline. That to me is where the rubber meets the road, and the director is deeply involved in the process. So keep in mind, if you are taking on a board role and you currently have a full-time role, weigh this into it. We talk in depth about this in the course and the program as well, about not only deciding if it's the right board for you, but some boards are way over this time commitment and their expectation that you're kind of bordering now on being an employee of the organization if you go much deeper in terms of your or further in your time commitment. Also, keep in mind if it's much less time commitment that's expected, that should be of concern to you as well. Is the board actually effective? Are they accomplishing what they're setting out to do? Are they respected in their organization if they're kind of this drop in, dropping out of the helicopter, make some decisions, and then disappear for a quarter? Um, this should really be where your mindset is when we look at public companies, we're almost dead on for the average amount of time. Typically, private companies, they're usually either nowhere near where they should be or they're way over. I think most private companies should aim to be around this mark as well. And I can tell you for nonprofit organizations to look at one other entity type, they're usually a lot less than this. I will say it again, as I said before, even for a nonprofit organization, if you're putting in less time than this, you're not really operating as a true board director or a board of directors.
As you're speaking, and I want to explain to everyone, if I'm looking around, I'm picking up questions from the chat, from the Q&A box, and attempting to coalesce a few into one question I can ask Mark. There are some that I don't know that I'll be able to, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a link that Will chat out earlier that invites you to a chat with Mark after today's talk. So I encourage everyone, whether you've asked a question or not, thought of one yet or not, take advantage of that to get your answers and your personal concerns addressed directly by the man himself. But the one thing I'm picking up, Mark, is this all sounds great, and I hear you so far, but I'm gonna struggle with getting started. I don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get as far as the interview process, and I've been there before, how will I move forward from there? I keep running into this brick wall. I know those are two separate questions, but they have something in common about forward motion, right?
Yeah.
How do we
Yeah.
address those questions people have?
Yeah. Well, you heard me say that the phrase earlier that you want to treat this as a discipline, not a hobby. I personally don't care about your background, your titles, your C-level prowess, all these things. Yeah, they're helpful, but it's not a it's not a dead set requirement to go down this path. So that's the first thing to mention about this. When it comes to and maybe a helpful comment to make here as well is that I personally believe right now in the board vertical, it is harder to get to the interview than it is to get the appointment. And if you think about that for a moment, that's kind of a strange thing to say because you would think that isn't the appointment harder to get. But with the level and the amount of submissions today for board roles, you need something that makes you stand out. And I'll give you a few quick examples of this and how you can lead to that interview. And I think I have something in this presentation also that I'll jump to in a moment. That'll talk about some of the areas where you can focus your conversation so you're not just looked at as a technical resource in an area of expertise. So let me make sure I can remember all these areas I'm going to talk about here, Tony, as we go. Um, so a few, let me jump to how you package yourself first. And this is a big area of the differentiator without sounding like I'm selling because I'm not, but the reason for our education course and the certification around it is not just to make great modern day directors at the operations level of boards, but also show directors how to package themselves. And a good example of how we can tell if somebody's done their homework or not when it comes to even just submitting for a board role. I can tell you right now, if you send me a document or a layout of a resume or CV, I already know you haven't done your homework because they're not called that in the board realm. They're called your board documents. They are totally different layouts. They are focused on different areas. We don't care about a resume format of gaps where, or your chronology of years of where you've worked. We're not looking for those things. We're looking for specific areas. A good example of this in what's called your board document, which fits as part of your board documents with an S, is a first section in your board document talking about any previous board or board committee experience. The next area is what we call board level experience. Board level experience is, have you ever been on the other side of the table, presenting to a board, supporting a CEO that is presenting to a board, working on a presentation with the data that's needed for a board to make a decision? That's all what we call board level experience. And then maybe breaking down into any type of leadership experience and really pulling out areas as we get to more education and certification areas, things that are totally board focused or senior leadership focused. Um, I can tell you if I receive a submission, Tony, that's is in resume format, and I have to search through it to pull out manually your board experience or your senior leadership areas, you've already failed. Um, of a I think I mentioned this in the last webinar we did together a few months ago, Tony, where in a recent nominating committee process that I built out and I'm working with for a client of mine, we received over 720 submissions for one board role, and only 12 people submitted properly as far as we view it as the discipline of board directorship. Where do you think most of the effort went in the vetting? It went to those folks. They did their homework. If you don't do your homework and how to submit properly for a board role, can I trust you're going to do your homework and your research when you're in the board role? That's the way we look at it. So something to think about is that. The other component of this is how you package yourself. And I hope, Tony, I'm still on track for the original question. Stop me if I'm not.
Yes, please keep
Okay.
going.
So another thing to think about in this, and let me go, I'm going to share my screen again for one moment. If you bear with me, I'll pull that up here. Just trying to jump between screens here. Okay. All right. Let me jump down through here. And I guess the big point to make here is that when we talked about the resume or CV versus your board documents. You can find out a little bit more about this. I always say for somebody, if you're going down the path of pursuing board directorship as an aspiring director, and definitely if you are considered to be an experienced director and you've sat on boards before, I can tell you I don't necessarily give previously seated board directors preference in the appointment process because maybe you're bringing bad practices to this board. So I will treat a lot of the interview process the same, whether you consider yourself experienced or aspiring. To me, it's the same vetting process. I don't necessarily give preference to one side of that. So when we talk about board documents and the packaging side, let me just see if I can find this real quick here. So when we talk about packaging, and this again is a parallel path within our education and certification program, just because just because you have the background, say, of leadership and the ability to be a great director, does not necessarily mean you're going to land a board role. And that's where we come back full circle again to this process of how do you package yourself, how do you find these opportunities. We show you how to do this through what we call your major and your three minors. So a major typically is what you do, primarily do, have done, or common titles that you've held in the past. So, for example, mine in this area is non-executive director, CEO, and I sometimes switch the last one out, but as of right now, it has to do with my expertise in the board role or my chief board consultant role. But if you look at my minors, the minors are where I show you also what particular committees can I serve on. So I, as a um, someone who's vetting a candidate may say, well, the opening we have right now is on the strategic planning committee, but you want to show me that, again, you're not just this one trick pony. What other areas can you serve on? We do that through the packaging of showing also three minors. So an example of my minors are focused in the strategy area, governance area, and I list specifically technology and cybersecurity as kind of my package third area of my minors. And we do what's called the committee test on that. Can you take that descriptive word and add the word committee behind it? And is that a pretty common committee or a very common committee in that realm? So if I use my example, I mentioned strategy. I can add the word committee behind that, either strategic planning or strategy committee. That's a fit. If I take governance, that's another one of my expertise areas I listed my minors. I can add the word committee behind that. And I know there are governance committees, of course, and typically also with the nominating committee. And if I take the technology cybersecurity area, maybe not as common to have a committee there, but that is growing. I want to show the expertise. I'm interested in boards where they have a focus on a technology committee or a bona fide area, workhorse area. So I list that specifically as technology with the specialty in cybersecurity in that particular space. The point of all of this is how do you make yourself stand out? Just because you have a great background and have had success at any level, even to CEO in an organization, I can tell you that does not get you over the finish line as it relates to either getting the interview initially or actually landing the role after the interview. Is that helpful, Tony, and how I've kind of packaged that up and understanding it's not just what you know, it's how you sell it is really where I'm getting to. And the selling it should show that you are disciplined in the board directorship realm, which has its own do's and don'ts as it relates to how you package yourself.
Yes, that was clear and understood.
Okay.
Another type of question has come up more than a couple of times, which has to do with networking your way into the boardroom, into the interview, and ultimately landing the seat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a more specific question, along with those more general ones, went something like, should I pay someone to help me network my way to that opportunity? What's your take on both of those? How do you do it? And is that a good option?
Yeah, it's a big question. I will tell you that we dedicate the last two sessions or chapters of the course to this as well. So, session 11 in the course is titled Establishing Your Authority, and session 12 is titled Successfully Marketing Yourself. So, let me first start by saying is that there is definitely a balance between going out and working with potentially a group that has opportunities in the board space. But I will tell you that I typically lean a little bit more so towards what we call this establishing your authority. And believe it or not, today, one of the most utilized platforms for board search is LinkedIn. And maybe we could say also other organizations. Tony, ExecuNet's a great example of this as well, of organizations that get those types of opportunities. Um, but in saying all of that, you need to cover your bases as it relates to this. And does say if you submit proper board documents, does that match back to what you have as your profile on LinkedIn? And many times I can tell you when I look at those, they'll list their non-executive director or board director credentials in their board documents. But then I go and look at their LinkedIn and it looks like it's a different person. I know it's the same because I see the picture, but the way they describe their expertise or what they're looking to do or what they do currently, it's almost like I'm looking at two different profiles in this. So you want to make sure you come up with a balance in this space. And when we say truly establishing your authority, it's in some way making yourself searchable and findable, if we could use a made-up word here as well, in your expertise areas. We typically say you can do that through writing, you can do that through speaking. Um, you want to make yourself discoverable and in some way, as closely as possible, link that back to what I mentioned a moment ago as your major and your three minors. We talk in the course about many ways of doing this. You can choose different ways of doing this. How much time you dedicate to it is fully up to you. But you need to make sure that your public persona is matching your persona um, that you're portraying as a director, whether it's aspiring or experienced is really almost irrelevant. But are you in the realm of talking about and even teaching or sharing information that matches back to your major and your minors? There's one other point I want to make sure I make here if I can remember what it was. I may have to come back to it in a second, but um, as it relates to that packaging that you probably hear me putting the emphasis on the packaging component. That is who you are. And you want to make sure you live true to that and you're backing up your major and your minors with things that you can prove are supportive of those areas. But you should always ask yourself the question once you finalize again what we call your major and your three minors, it makes your decisioning quite easy on things you get involved with. And ask yourself the question once you define your major and your three minors, this speaking I'm being asked to do, is this directly in line with something that supports one or more of my major and minors? If I get involved in some other organization, maybe I make a decision in the future on a position as a stepping stone that's more conducive in the future to board work than it is anything else. I may actually make that decision based on the runway or the path I've created for myself to make something that's more palatable for a committee area in the future. That's the way you should be thinking about this trajectory of how you package yourself and use it as part of your strategic plan personally.
I want to be sensitive to the clock, but I also have a few more questions I want to take from the studio audience and ensure that they're heard. First question has to do with something you and I have talked about, which is, I think you put it to me, Mark, as board services kind of riskier lately. Tell me what you meant by that and what one can do about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can tell you there's been a few very close personal friends of mine that are also professional friends that have put themselves in some really bad spots. So let's be very clear about this. What we used to call this um, corporate veil that was out there because you had an incorporation or you were an officer of an organization that you're not personally responsible. I can tell you that that armor has little breaks in it right now. It has little openings here and there that you want to be very careful of. And board directorship, especially, can be risky if you don't have the right types of protections. So, I don't mean to say this to scare anybody, but you need to do your homework on this. Again, I'll say we go in depth in the course on this to make sure you understand what you're looking for. By no means is everybody, including myself, going to have all of the legal background to dig through this. But what I do know makes me dangerous enough to know that I need to have somebody like a corporate attorney review if I get in an indemnification policy or a D&O policy. I'm going to go and share my screen again while I give these details, Tony. I'm going to use you as my person to verify that there is actually a screen showing.
I see a screen.
All right, so let me jump to that page here in just a moment. Sorry. Here we go. Okay, so there are three areas you want to think about. And trust me when I tell you, if you think that you're serving on a nonprofit board and it does not require insurance, the two examples that I'm talking about in the background right now were directors who were sued that were serving or who were serving on nonprofit boards. So nonprofit boards can be quite risky because you have just as much of the same personal liability as you do on a public or a private company. Because if that organization gets sued, they are going to mention the directors. And then if you don't have indemnification or D&O insurance, you have to pay for that representation yourself. So let me explain just high level what these are. Many people are familiar with the individual areas, but I want to show you how they fit together. First, understand in this that when we talk about D&O insurance or director and officer liability insurance, this is typically what you want to have as a director of any organization. I can tell you right now, I personally will not even serve in a nonprofit that does not have D&O insurance. Know that this is in series, not in parallel. So one of the big misunderstandings in the board director space is that, oh, well, if my corporate indemnification reaches a certain point, my D&O kicks in parallel to that. That's not how it works. The corporate indemnification basically is saying that the company or the organization is first going to represent you. And as a director, you want to know how they're going to represent you and what they're going to do as it relates to the monetary support if you get sued, as a board or an individual director. That typically, when that is fully utilized or run out, that's when the D&O insurance kicks in. Now, one of the big challenges with this is that, and I'm just going to, I don't know if I have that slide here, but there are exclusions. And one of the big areas that bites directors in any type of entity of organization is that there are gaps between the corporate indemnification and the D&O, which basically what I'm trying to say is that there are things that are not covered that slip through the cracks between the indemnification and the D&O. This is the time where directors find out they didn't do their homework early on and have an expert look at this and point out what those gaps are. You do have a stopgap in this in some cases through IDL. Most directors are not aware of this globally. But there is another type of insurance that typically kicks in series, but it will kick in parallel in some areas if there's gaps between the corporate indemnification and the D&O. This will be the best money you ever spend out of your pocket as a director to go and purchase your own IDL insurance. And this basically is saying that is covering you either for specific instances or gaps between the indemnification and the D&O. Again, I will tell you it's some of the best money you're ever going to spend as a director. It's going to give you peace of mind. I typically recommend that the IDL carrier is different than the D&O carrier, just to give a little diversity there and to understand that one carrier, you get where I'm going there. um, so a bunch of different things to think of here. I'm only scratching the surface on this of what I think most directors need to know. You want to know your risk going into this, and you want to understand how you can cover your risk. So by the time you're seated and you accept the appointment and your name is appearing on the announcements, that's you've greatly minimized your risk in serving in that position. One last thing to say, Tony, on this is that one of the things I recommend to many boards as part of their compensation package and the perk is for the organization itself to either reimburse or fund directly the IDL insurance for each one of their independent directors. It can be quite a great perk for that director to have the company or the organization looking out for that as well.
Super. Well, we've kind of come to the end of our scheduled time, a little over. I do want to allow a little time at the end, Mark, for you to just kind of share some closing thoughts, remarks on things you really want people to hold on to after today's talk. But let me begin by saying thank you for making time and sharing your insight. Thank you to all. There were so many that tuned in. I couldn't be happier. And you asked marvelous questions, and I'm sorry I didn't get to all of them. I know I haven't. But hey, I'll make excuses. But seriously, that's what that link is for as well. It's to have a chat one-on-one with someone who clearly knows his space, has been in it for a very long time, and can tell you all you really need to know about certification and training, which I know was a continual thread through the chat today. And I wanted to just leave some time for Mark at the end to maybe talk about that a little bit more or share what other thoughts, Mark, you feel would close out our session today.
Yeah. Well, I think the big point to take away today is to view board directorship as a discipline. It's not a rite of passage because of a previous position. Just because you were potentially C-level before this doesn't mean you're going to be a great director. Just because you weren't C-level before this doesn't mean you can't be a great director. Do this, view this as a discipline. I'm not asking you to change who you are, what your background is. I'm asking you to take that and put it into a palatable format that's recognized in the board director vertical. So you're showing where you bring value to these boards. Again, a lot of what we mentioned today, Tony, I know you sent out links. They can either link out directly for a conversation. You have your link also directly into the course areas, different ways to take that course. There's an on-demand, there's a group, as well as a one-on-one. All those different areas are available to you. Put the time into this. It's worth it. And I think it's one of the best careers at any point in someone's professional career. It's extremely rewarding.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all. And I hope you move forward and discover what you're looking for, what's been missing. All right. Thank you. Bye for
Great.
now.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, ExecuNet, too. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.